and one would say that the first step towards any startup is the idea. However, I disagree. Actually, the first step is the pre-idea. So what I mean by this is that as a founder, there's a lot that you can do before you even come up with a problem or a solution to a problem. Uh, and that is the reason why I want to take a moment and emphasize on what the Finnish startup ecosystem has to offer in this space where you don't even have an idea yet, or you haven't decided that you want to become a founder, or you even consider entrepreneurship. And I would divide these into two categories. First of all, there's the inspiration part. So there's a lot of things in the Finnish startup ecosystem that can get you inspired about entrepreneurship. And why it's important is because if you don't know any founder, if you don't have any role model, if you don't know what has the journey been for the success stories, it's a really big leap of faith to start your own company. And so the other part then is education. If you come from a tech background or you don't have the entrepreneurial studies in your business school, um, a lot of people feel like, oh, but I don't have what it takes. Like me being a founder, CEO, like what? How does it even work? What are like the legal things? I don't have the training for this. Especially in Finland, people tend to think that entrepreneurship is some kind of a like for a very limited type of people, but it's actually it could be for anyone. Like if you have the right problem and you have an idea, then you can become an entrepreneur like anyone else. But for the inspiration part, we have a lot of very relevant events, and actually, Switch would be here as well. So, if you don't have any idea what all of the startup buzz is about, attending these kinds of events like Slush or Arctic 15 or Fall Up, or walking in on Maria 01 to one of their community events, or attending a hackathon like Junction, there's a lot of ways how you can take a peek into the startup ecosystem without committing in any way. And I would argue that it really doesn't hurt as the world is tending to move towards a more entrepreneurial world, not only in the sense of a startup, but also larger companies are forming subdivisions that operate like startups to stay competitive. So having any kind of insight or like a way to access these success stories and talk to people and see what are the problems people are working with is extremely valuable. And the Finnish ecosystem is in that sense very unique that we are very student driven. Slush, Junction, Alta ES, Startup Lifers, Viet ES, everything is essentially student driven. And that has been for the past 10 years one of the major contributors to why we are in such a good place with our overall startup ecosystem. But then, of course, on the education side, there's of course university courses, and I think currently almost any like higher education school has some kind of way to do educational courses, and I highly suggest that because entrepreneurship is not going away. Also, if you're an immigrant, we have the shortcut who do talent acceleration. They help you land the skills you need to land a job in a startup. But if you are unclear of any kind of startup terminology, like what is a term sheet or what is a product market fit, what is your go to market strategy, or how do you even come up with the idea, or how does it work legally, what is funding, I highly suggest that you take the Starting Up online course. It's free and you can get 2 credits out of it if you're a student here. But or if you are not from here, you can still do it. It's free and it has all of the basics covered, and it was created with the sole purpose of leveling the playing field for entrepreneurship. So even though you wouldn't have worked at 5 startups before founding your own company, you can go do the course and learn what is it that people are even talking about when it comes to entrepreneurship. And the only thing on this presentation that is not related to Finland is the Y Combinator startup school. Um, if you don't know, Y Combinator is probably one of the world's most renowned startup accelerators, and they through them have gone companies like Airbnb, Slack, Stripe. There's like a lot of good companies that have grown into like giants that I went through Y Combinator, and they have a lot of free course content for you as a founder to go through. So no matter what your background is, no matter if you haven't done any occupational or like any sort of education after elementary school, the resources exist. It's only about whether you want to tap into all of these free resources or not. And now, after you have maybe gotten a little bit more on the sort of basis of the premise of before you even have an idea, we can move into the idea section. And if you have an idea for a company, that's great. But a lot of times you don't actually even have a right solution. You have a problem you want to fix. And as Stephen mentioned, that is where everything should start. Find a problem you're passionate about, and the idea will follow. And through that, you will also make sure that you're not too stuck up with one solution, because if that doesn't work, you won't be able to change your course. So obviously, I suggest that start out with a really important problem. And of course, we can go into the details of like, what is a meaningful problem? Usually it's something that people have often and it's painful and they're willing to pay for it. If no one is willing to pay for a problem to be solved, it's probably a problem that is more of a nice to have. Um, but in any case, if you're in this stage that you identify a problem and it doesn't even, you don't even know is it if it's monetizable or not, but it's a problem you want to solve, there's a lot the Finnish startup ecosystem can do to help you. So one of the biggest problems people usually have is in creating a business out of it. And the other part is networking. And with networking, I mean that there's usually way too little interaction with a person who has some kind of an idea for a problem or like a solution to a problem, and all of the talent that is out there. And why this is a problem is that if you are on a tunnel vision, you start a company with a group of friends and you do it for 2 years, and no one ever asks you, so who's your customer? Or what do you plan to do if this and this happens? Or how do you plan to sell this? Or whatever it is, usually people get too fixated on the idea if they don't get feedback early on. And also, if you are an aspiring founder, you have a problem you want to solve. It might be that there just isn't people around you who are passionate about it and would have the talent to help you out, or the skills. And that is why networking alongside with help in the creating a business is usually what sort of differentiates then the success stories from the ones that die off a little bit later. But in the creating a business space, there is a lot in Finland that can help you out. So I want to first highlight Suomi.fi. They have a 12-step plan for what you need to cover to start a company eligibly in Finland, even though you wouldn't be a Finnish citizen. So it's like meant for the sole purpose that you can land there. It's a very rememberable URL, and you can go to the like business or entrepreneurship section, and it's like, okay, here are the things you need to do, and then you're eligible to found a company in Finland legally. Then if you need help, you just have no idea what to do with your business, organizations like VTS, of course, can help you out. There's Helsinki Fin Company. You can march in there and say, hey, I have an idea. I don't know what to do with it. Where should I go? Newco in Helsinki, they also can help you out. Startup Sauna, currently partially closed, but in theory, you walk in, you say, I have an idea, where should I go to? And usually people will direct you to the right place. Now, also, we have a program called Kiuas Start, which is an accelerator program for startups that have a problem and maybe a prototype, but they don't have a business yet. They don't have the customers, they don't have the revenue, maybe. And that's actually coming in November as well. So really soon, and you're going to hear more about it maybe later. But for the networking part, there's a lot of other players as well. So if you want to found a company in Espoo, which is a perfect place to find a company, you walk into Business Espoo's office in Otaniemi and you say, I have an idea. Where should I go to? And they usually know the different players who you should talk to. Same thing with Helsinki Business Hub. If you're a startup and you're abroad and you want to come to Finland, Helsinki Business Hub will get you connected. Then there's these kinds of pre-founder communities like what Icebreaker has. So if you just want to be more involved with other people who might found a company, Icebreaker has a community for that I have heard a lot of good about. But then if I would have one thing that I suggest to all of you during this presentation, it's going to be that sign up on Kiuas Insight. So it's a free platform, and the sole purpose of the platform is that you can find your co-founder. So usually when you have an idea, it might be that you're really requiring that other counterpart. And we are very limited by the people around us. So Kiuas Insight was found on the sole purpose that if you need to find a co-founder, go to Kiuas Insight, look around, publish your project or publish your profile, and you can find someone who you can collaborate with. And it's insight.kiuas.com, and I highly, highly suggest it. We've already seen some teams form of people who've never met in their lives. They come from different countries to Finland. They find each other in Kiuas inside. They form a company, and now they're doing pretty rapidly advancing. So, of course, in many years, we'll see more how it's going to evolve, but Kiuas Inside is here to stay. All right. So now that you have a problem and you at this stage you have some kind of initial idea, and I want to highlight that never get stuck on a single idea. But after you get to the part where you say that, okay, now I found a company, then a next level of doors unlock to you. So if you register a company in Finland, there's suddenly a lot more players that can help you out. And they can help you out, for example, with acceleration or with a co-working space. So when it comes to acceleration, if you don't know what a startup accelerator is, startup accelerators, they take you to a 2 month, 1 month program, and they aim to give you as many resources as possible so that your progress is accelerated tenfold. So instead of spending 1 year on a startup you just founded with your team, you're going to get mentoring, you're going to get software tools, you're going to get frameworks, how to even think about the problem you're having. You're going to get industry connections. This is what usually accelerators do. And what is interesting about the Finnish startup ecosystem is that almost all of them are for free. And that is absolutely bonkers. And so if you go to almost any country abroad, the basic idea is that you pay a certain amount of equity of your company, like 7% of ownership of your company, and they invest some money into you, or they don't even invest some money into you. They just, that's the price for having you there. But in Finland, almost all of the accelerators are for free. And it would be crazy as a startup, as a founder, if you come up with any idea now or in 5 years, do tap into these resources because they are free for you. And that is not do not take it for granted around the world that everyone gets acceleration for free. It's only in Finland. And this is largely because there has been such a boost in the student driven entrepreneurship scene. And a few to highlight: if you're in Helsinki region, Kiuas Accelerator has been voted the best accelerator a few years in a row. Red Brick is in Tampere, Boost is in Turku. Alta University has their own as well, which is like if you want to commit for 1 to 2 years. Mutiny by Helsinki. There's also Sampo in Otaniemi. And at this stage, I want to emphasize that if I talk a lot about the players in the Finnish capital region, that is because I know them best. And of course, you can criticize me on this. But in reality, all over Finland, especially in the student cities that have some kind of university action, there is an accelerator, there is a co-working space, there is all of these kinds of tools. So, for example, there's Business Tampere, there's Business Oulu, there's Oulu has their own health hub and so forth. There's like, these do not limit to the capital region. And that is also a very powerful thing about Finland, that you actually, especially now that they're virtual, most of these, you can just be almost anywhere and you can still have like immense amount of free tools for you on building your startup. Next up, about co-working spaces. So there's a lot of them in the capital region, and they depend a little bit of the pricing. Many of them, like the ones in Otaniemi and Helsinki Think Company, they work in a way, and Newco, they work in a way that if they have vacancies, you can just march in and say, I have a startup, can I be here? And usually it doesn't cost anything. Then there's places like Maria or Epicenter where they have some kind of a cost, but the benefit of being surrounded by other startups and having to meet, for example, other CEOs who are struggling with the same things as you can pay off in the long term quite a lot. And now that Maria is getting an expansion and aims to be Europe's largest co-working hub or like startup hub, it might be a very relevant place to look at. But overall, what I would suggest is that if there's any co-working spaces nearby, utilize them. They might be free. Accelerators, pretty much the same thing. And now to talk about money. And one thing I want to mention before we dive into the actual funding resources that exist in Finland, I want to mention that no matter pretty much where you are, and especially in Finland, if you have a strong problem and a good idea and a team, the money will follow. Like, you don't have to, like, one common misconception I see a lot is that you somehow have to always be on this pitch mode, convincing investors that you actually do have a good thing. But if you have to like constantly be explaining to everyone what you do, there might be something wrong with what you do. Now, I don't mean that you shouldn't be giving the best impression. So, of course, like practicing pitches and so forth is very important. But I think the misconception is that there somehow would be a lack of capital and we have to fight for it. Whereas we have a lot of players in the Finnish startup ecosystem that can help you out in many ways. And the funding part is actually where the Finnish ecosystem thrives. So when it comes to funding, there's public and private funding, very universal. But in Finland, the first place where you should go to when you found your company is the TE office. So they handle unemployment, and being a founder doesn't mean you're unemployed. But if you're a founder, you can either choose to raise unemployment benefits, or there's this thing called starttiraha, which grants you around 600 euros per month for 1 to 1.5 years. It has been raised to 1.5 years because of COVID, of funding just because you're doing your own business primarily. And so you already have a safety net that you're not left with nothing when you start your company. And one common trap with founders is that they say that I don't want to take the risk of founding a company because it's going to cost me all of my savings and I have like the steady job. Should I go for it? But steady jobs aren't maybe the ones that are going to save the world. I think entrepreneurship is a lot more powerful. And because of places like Finland, where there's actually the societal safety net, even for entrepreneurs, you should use that and you should be more problem driven and actually go for the problems that are important in this world. And there's no reason not to go when you have players like the TE office. Now, one thing I might want to mention that people often don't look at is that universities and schools all around Finland have grants, and a lot of them are related to entrepreneurship. So if you are like related to any kind of an educational department in Finland, then there's likely some money involved that you can access. And these are usually grants. And if you don't know the terminology, grant means you don't have to pay it back. And now then we get into one of the players that makes Finland maybe one of the best startup ecosystems in the world, or like contributes to it quite a lot. And that is Business Finland. What they do is they provide grants and they provide loans. And with the Business Finland, their idea is that they want to not only bring foreign talent to Finland to start companies here, and I would assume that if there's people here listening today who are not from Finland, Business Finland is very interested in you, but also they want to scale the Finnish companies to the world. So in case you don't know, Finland is not a super big market. And the attitude that you should have is that don't make a company that focuses only on the Finnish market unless there is a very, very clear reason to do so, but rather ask the question, why isn't this a global problem? Why shouldn't I start thinking about the rest of the world since day one? And I think this is a space where we see a lot of issues of people thinking that, well, I have to kind of go for the home market first. I have to sort of be a very strong player here before I can start even think about any other markets. But ever since COVID and everyone is being virtual in any way, you're not going to meet the people in another country. You're not going to meet your sales representative in Germany physically, but rather you're having a Zoom call or a video call. And because of that, the barrier for starting internationally is lower. And when you have players like Business Finland who actually provide you grants to go international as soon as possible, all of the incentives are pretty much in place. But Business Finland does a lot, and they provide you grants and funding. And how they usually work is that if you have some kind of a project that you want to take international, turn it into a vibrant startup, or you need to do some research about your startup, then they have models where you usually have to pay around 25% of the costs of your like upcoming plan of like 1 or 2 years, and they will pay for 75% or up to 75%, which is that you can get away with a lot of expenses that are going to go to Business Finland. And I want to highlight that almost every successful startup that you know, starting from companies like Volt or Supercell or Rovio, Smartly, all of them have behind them some Business Finland money. All of them have used that card before. So if you really want to mimic these kind of success stories, Business Finland is a really relevant place to go, because they also have, I think, representatives in over 40 other countries. So if you have a product that you feel like you want to take global, Business Finland not only provides you the money to expand, but they also have the physical places and the connections where to go. So that is a thing that a lot of people don't exactly understand as well. But combined with the TE office and the grants from Business Finland, you can start working on a company without losing a single percent of your company to private investors. But if you decide to go into private investment or private funding, which I, in many cases, would also recommend, we happen to have Europe's largest angel investor network right here in Finland, and that is Fiban. And what they do is that if you have a startup idea and you're looking for angel investors, that means investors who are usually individuals, or it might be groups of individuals, but usually it's not an established organization in the same way. And they help you really early on, and they can mentor you and help you progress, and they commit usually a lot as individual people. Fiban is a network of those people. So if you have a startup that is already, you're thinking about, okay, this seems to work, I want to take it big, then Fiban has like a very good access point to a bunch of angel investors that you definitely should look at and use. And combined with Business Finland, there exists a lot of powerful combos. So Business Finland might have some kind of a grant where you need like 10K of your own capital and they provide you 50K grant. So the 10K might be an angel investor who's willing to chip in from Fiban. And then you suddenly have a mentor and you have Business Finland backing you. And through that, you've lost only a fraction of equity that you would compare to almost any other place in the world. So there exist these kinds of synergies and combos that you can do to get your startup running really fast with a surprisingly large amount of capital, even though you haven't lost almost any equity. And then you also have the safety net always that if you would for some reason get unemployed, Finland is a country where the societal benefits are quite nice. So you have still national health care, and you have also, of course, unemployment, and like you won't like lose everything if for some reason the startup would not fail. But rather it's also a good place to start your second company if the first one for some reason would not go into as big as you want. Then I want to mention on the bank side, turns out in Finland, banks like Nordea are extremely proactive in granting loans to startups. So sometimes loan is a better alternative than like equity or like selling equity in forms of funding. And Nordea actually probably, I think they have invested more into startups through loans than the entire VC ecosystem in Finland has combined. And so if you're looking into expansion and you're looking for loans, we have also the banks in the bank industry that is willing to support you on that. So all of these players are aligned towards you creating a company and scaling it huge. And I don't mean just by being the next Volt in Finland, but like Volt does, very super international, like going actually to the world. And then, of course, we happen to have a lot of amazing VCs. And actually, Amy here is from Wave Ventures, which is a student or very young driven venture capital firm. And they aim to invest before anyone else does. Then we have a lot of different different flavors with these VCs. So for example, Voima Ventures, they invest into deep tech. We have Lifeline, who focus on being the first investor quite early on as well. We have like all the different VCs from like energy to media and so forth. Finding people to invest to you, if you have a good problem and a good idea, is not hard, but rather you get to choose who you talk to. And what is really nice is that the Finnish funding ecosystem is very locally connected, as is the whole Finnish startup ecosystem. So if you know someone from Maki-VC, they know everyone from Superhero, Icebreaker, Yes VC, NGP. And so even though you would talk to a VC and they're like, well, this is not actually a company we're looking for, they usually can direct you to the right people if you have the right problem. So what is really nice is that for you to talk to the top investors in Finland doesn't take a lot. It's just like one phone call away or one email. And in Finland, the general mindset is that everyone wants to help you. And that is not universal. In Silicon Valley, if you want to go talk to someone, it might require like a few warm leads to get them on a call for 15 minutes. In Finland, you talk to someone who has made like the biggest exit in Finland's history, and they would say like, sure, yeah, sure, you want to go for a coffee? I can help you with the idea, even though they would have like no financial interest. they still want to contribute to this ecosystem. And I think this kind of talkohenki of like coming together and creating successful companies really describes the Finnish startup ecosystem. And that is something that you should keep in mind of, that not everyone is your enemy, but rather the Finnish ecosystem is more about there's a hyper collaborative nature. Like, how can we help you is very normal. But that sort of sums up the big picture of the startup ecosystem. And I would like to take a brief moment to talk about Kiuas and why am I here talking, and how do we fit into this entire picture. And we believe that the world is going to be saved by sustainable success stories. And what I mean by that is we need startups and entrepreneurship that can scale to incredible size, or like become monstrously dominant around the world. However, through also contributing to the society. So we believe that startups have a lot of potential in giving back to the society. And for that, we need them to be big. And here I have a very sort of simple representation of a funnel where on the left-hand side, you have all of the people in the world, people who could potentially be entrepreneurs. And on the right-hand side, that is where you grow as a company and you become larger and you take a larger piece of the pie of the world's markets. And so naturally, what we want to do as Kiuas, we want to take the people, get them to start companies, and we want the companies to get larger so that they contribute to the society and that they are sustainable companies. We also believe that it's not only about getting larger and getting bigger, but also realizing when you need to take a step back. So that means if your startup fails, that is totally okay. It's not a failure, even though your startup goes under. It's about learning. And one sort of mindset that I want all of you to have about startups is that everything is a hypothesis. So your startup is always a hypothesis of a person will buy my product because of a problem XYZ they have. Or that I can help these people by selling this product to these groups of people, or I'm going to be at this stage in 2 years. Like, everything you do is about hypothesis testing. And if you would have a perfect answer to how things are going to go, then it wouldn't maybe be exactly a startup. But the idea is that there's a lot of assumptions, there's a lot of hypotheses, and it's totally okay if the hypotheses fail. So if you realize that I have the great team, I have the great idea, but the problem, people just don't buy the product. It's a perfect product for the problem, but no one just actually wants to buy it. That's a good learning. And then you can move back and you can rethink. So what is a product that people maybe would buy so that it can scale to some larger proportions? But all in all, remember that progress is not only getting more people employed and getting like larger revenue, but also when you realize that you need to completely change what you do. And ditching your company and starting all over again is also a really, really good idea a lot of times. And I think one problem is that people tend to take it too personally when they found a company, and then they never want to let go, which is in some cases also good to be kind of resilient, but in a lot of cases also not. But how we contribute to this is that we have these kinds of portals, or like, I don't know, boosters, like jump pads, how you can advance to the next level to get closer to the magical dream of becoming a sustainable unicorn. And the first stepping stone is the starting up course. Once again, if you don't know anything about entrepreneurship, but you would want to know, take the starting up course. Takes a few hours. You learn all the basics and you don't have that excuse anymore. Kiuas Inside. If you feel like you want to fund your own company, you maybe have an idea, or maybe you don't have an idea, but you want to find people who have ideas, or find a person who could collaborate with your idea. Kiuas Inside, free platform for you to find talent. Kiuas Start, when you have an idea and you want to turn it into a business, it's an accelerator program, takes 1 month. And then we have the Kiuas Accelerator, which is a 2-month long program for existing startups, and how we absolutely monstrously give them the unfair advantage of scaling and going international by providing connections and tools and resources, so that not only they are the best teams that we take from the applications, but also we give them like even more upper hand, so that they have the chances to become like these next, I don't know, next Google or whatever you want to put into there. But anywho, the basic idea is that people do starting up, people do Kiuas Inside, after which they form a company. For example, Droppe, what they do is that when Corona hit, they decided that they actually want to provide workplaces personal protective equipment because they realized that the supply chains are incredibly hard, and with any kind of masks, there's the certificate thing, and a uh, regular CEO probably doesn't know anything about it. Sort of where should they go to? So their idea is that they can ship you 10,000 masks on the next day, and they started like during COVID. They were like, this is a problem we want to solve. Let's start working on it. And they have a company running, and currently they have a campaign called Suojapaikka, which is the idea is that let's promote the responsibility of the employers, how employers can sort of help battle COVID. That is like the ultimate idea. Didn't nail the pitch there. But after Kiuas start, we've seen companies like Step Out. What they do is virtual well-being and fitness by providing courses um, that are done through like virtual lessons. And then we have companies who've done Kiuas Accelerator like Gubbe or Swappy. Swappy, you might know, sells reused iPhones. If you're buying a new iPhone, you're wasting money, go to Swappy. And Gubbe, they do elderly care. They sort of hire especially high schoolers to uh, visit your grandma. So if you're, for example, working in Helsinki, but your family is from Oulu or Rovaniemi, it can be quite hard to visit them, and of course, like loneliness of elderly is a huge problem. So you can hire a local high schooler from Oulu to go visit your grandma, and it has been like very visible in social media, and it has been sort of it's one of these stories that it has to be found in the Nordics, because in the Nordics, startups are usually always they have like some kind of a societal impact in mind instead of like just marginalizing profits. Not always, but still, it's kind of like a very sort of inspiring story, considering that the founders also, I think they met through some kind of a maternity group in Facebook. So not like the traditional tech head founders. But all in all, sort of how we've been able to contribute through our existence is that we've had 10,000 people take the starting up course. We've had 1,000 people, or we have over 1,000 people in the Kiuas Inside platform. We have 250 alumni who have gone through either Start or Accelerator or the previous programs that had different names. And then our alumni have raised over 70 million in total, which is like, considering the Finnish market, where usually that sort of for 1 year, the amount of capital that teams raise is yeah, it's not like comparable to Silicon Valley. So 70 million is a pretty decent amount. That concludes my presentation about the Finnish startup ecosystem. And if you have any questions or comments, or you feel like your idea needs help, like, you can always send me a message. There's my email or LinkedIn or whatever works best for you. And our sort of vision as Kiuas is to help all of the companies, and we do it best through programs. But once again, Kiuas Insight starting up, check out those. But if nothing else, send me a message and we'll figure something out. We want to see you thrive and solve the planet's problems. And I'll be super happy to take any questions if there are any. I think you're muted, Stephen.
Oh, yes. Yes, we have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So let's start with the first one. Um, in your opinion, what are considered good enough for an idea or solution to get
Mm,
sufficient amounts of funding? Any trend that investors are usually interested in?
mm. Yeah. So I think it all once again starts with the problem. Like, if you can show that the problem is actually worth solving, not always the investors even buy your sort of final product, but sometimes they just might buy the problem, and they might consider it important enough that someone is solving it to, for example, have angel investors on board, and they want to help you figure out what is the final product. Um, Usually, there's a lot of good frameworks of how to do your startup, right? And I don't know if you have ever heard about the lean startup, but this kind of hypothesis, but also metrics driven approach, where you just do hypotheses, you test them. And if you hit the jackpot and sort of you can see that, okay, people are actually using this, or people are actually using this to solve their problem, then you should see it in some sort of numbers. It could be users of your product, it could be revenue or margins, it could be how many people referred onwards. But what usually interests investors, and this is like, I'm talking about VC investors now, and not like, for example, Business Finland, if you consider them as an investor, which, well, they're kind of not. But what they are interested in is that if you can show that these are the actual free relevant metrics that we need to follow, like if these metrics go through the roof, then we know that we're going to be huge. And if you can show that they are on a steady rise due to your efforts, then you can argue that, well, if you pour more money into the startup, we're gonna break records here. We're gonna really change the world. So usually, how you should consider VC funding or angel funding is that they pour money into you so that you can just go bigger, and the sooner you put money in, the bigger it's gonna get. And usually with startups, there's something like competitive advantage that might be due to like economics of scale and trying to be the first one who gets to a certain level, so that you can dominate the market. And that is why VC money is often considered important. But I also want to highlight that if you have a product that people are willing to pay for, then you might not even need any kind of funding or Business Finland or TE office, but you can bootstrap, which means that you fund everything based on the sales that you make. And to be honest, I believe that if you're actually solving a meaningful problem, there's usually a lot of people who are willing to pour money, whether it's already the customers early on or then the VCs. So, like, to summing up, if you want to really be interested by, or like the investors to be interested in you, have a solid problem, have an idea for it, and of course, like a good team always goes a long way, and then show that you're on the right track, essentially.
Well, yeah, thank you for the answer. And one reminder for the participant, tomorrow we have a fundraising workshop. Well,
Mm.
so that from Inventure, one of the biggest venture capital in Finland. So this would be very helpful to talk about funding. And yeah, the next question is that thank you for your insight and very fun and very informative speech. Finnish sounds like a wonderful ecosystem which encourage and support startup a lot. I
Mm.
wonder, would language be a problem because Finland speak its own language?
Yeah, so in case you didn't know, almost every Finnish person speaks English. And it's kind of a okay, so the language question depends on if you want to work in an existing company. For some reason, there's still a lot of barrier in some existing Finnish companies, especially larger ones, where they feel like, yeah, you kind of need to know Finnish, where in reality, the work might be entirely in English. But usually, when companies launch in Finland and they want to go international, they just do all of their thing in English since day one, except like the mandatory legal stuff that might need to be in Finnish. But otherwise, if you want to be global and you want to hire like the most sharpest people in Finland who found startups, they of course want the international talent, right? So why limit to a country of 5.5 million people when you have the whole world that could come to your aid? So I can't recall sort of startups launching that are like 100% Finnish since day one, and they would like stick to that. So I would argue that definitely not. It's not going to be a problem. Like if you know English, then it's not going to be a problem. And depends, of course, like what you aim to do as well. If you want to hire a lot of local people, then sometimes people prefer Finnish. But from my perspective, in the startup ecosystem, no one has had any problem to do English. Like all of our accelerator programs are in English. All of our content is in English as well. Like and yeah, and we have most of the teams are just Finnish people, unfortunately. But, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so moving to the next question is about the Finnish ecosystem. As far as I know, about 20 years ago, being an entrepreneur is something rather strange and underestimated.
Mm.
But now there is much support and even free accelerating services.
Mm.
What do you think about what has changed the situation and turned things upside down like this?
Yeah. So I on purposely did not go too much into the history because I think usually when I've heard someone talk about the Finnish startup ecosystem, they want to highlight the sort of unique history that we have. However, every time when someone speaks about the history of the Finnish startup ecosystem, everyone has a different story. So I'm going to give you like my story, and like the next person who's going to talk about it is going to give their story. But so we used to have companies like Nokia, who were like enormous, and all of the tech talent used to pour into there. Now, when Nokia goes under, and suddenly people start thinking, so after graduation, where do I go? Of course, the talent is much more ripe towards thinking more openly about entrepreneurship. But then what really sort of kicked it off was Alta ES forming. So there's this university called Alta University, which formed a little over 10 years ago by the combination of tech, business, and arts. And so when Alta was formed, there was a group of students who decided that they want to think differently about entrepreneurship. And they formed this group called Alta Entrepreneurship Society, which has been the basis of student-led entrepreneurial activity in Finland. And they went to Silicon Valley and brought some of the like talented entrepreneurs from there to Finland to give speeches. And they just ambitiously went around the world and said to everyone, like, Finland is the best place. Finland is the best place. Come to Finland. And then a lot of people believed them. And in 10 years, they've attracted a lot of foreign capital to Finnish startups. And not only capital, but with that has come also talent. And also, like, the whole startup ecosystem has come on the sort of following up on that initial spike of like converting talent into entrepreneurs. And there's like the story that Peter Westerbacka tends to tell that when he was giving a lecture in 2009 or something in Alta University Business School and asked how many people want to become entrepreneurs, like 3 people raised their hands. And I think some of the people came to organize Slashman later. But after like 7-8 years of operating Slush, he asked the same question in a room filled with people, like with 600 people, and half of the people raised their hand, like want to become entrepreneurs. So it started out with like this student driven, changing the attitude. And then for the universities or the public side or like VCs, everyone to follow up on that has been relatively easy. Um, but yeah, that is, I would say that is definitely one reason, or like one of the major reasons, the sort of student initiatives that has changed the attitude. Yeah.
Yeah, great story. And the next question is, what are some of the most common mistakes you have seen startup founder in Finland make?
Oh, most common mistakes. Oh yeah, this is a fun one. Um, well, okay, first one, which is not a mistake, but I think clearly people don't understand, is that there's a lot of free tools out there. Like people don't utilize all of the free services that are out there. So that is like just one thing I want to get out of the way. But one of the biggest problems, I think, is that people don't understand their problem. And this might be that if you're working in tech or any industry and you come up with an idea, you might love the idea or the new technology or the new product, and you're like, it makes so much sense. I could see this as, everyone using it in the future. Like this could be something that everyone has. But usually the path towards getting to a point where the thing you're trying to build that everyone would use it is kind of impossible. Um, so one thing I'd like to say is that people don't understand the problems. Like if you don't understand who has the problem, like one good question that the CEO of Y Combinator asked is, who would go bankrupt if your product doesn't exist? Like who would like have the shittiest day in the world if your product doesn't exist? And if you can't answer that question, that, well, no one really cares, then it might be an indicator that you're not actually doing anything. Now, of course, here you can assume that people would be using your product already. But that, like, the problem related things are maybe one of the most important ones. Like if you can understand the problem, then the sort of natural product will follow. And then definitely people not being able to pivot or rethink or try to go back to the stage of founding the company again and thinking like, okay, so what are we actually trying to solve? I think there's a lot of problems there. Like a lot of people don't realize what is actually relevant and what is not. Then one thing is metrics. People don't understand metrics. Like if you found a company, it should be really important that you come up with the numbers that describe perfectly whether you're succeeding or not. And there's usually 1 to 3 numbers that where you can say that, okay, now we're making progress and now we're not. but instead people are fixated on people, like for example the number of users, even though it might not mean anything. It might mean that you're like spamming people and they're registering, but it doesn't mean that people are maybe using your product right. So figuring out metrics is an like art as well as a science, but I think a lot of people struggle with that as well. So they go to investors, they say like, we have these kinds of numbers, but no one really cares because the numbers don't mean anything. This is called vanity metrics also, but yeah, those are
Yeah,
some.
really interesting. And yeah, another question about the ecosystem. In Corona time, how can the ecosystem help startup to survive?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So from the public side, um, Business Finland has their own funding vehicle of giving grants to startups who are in need. So if you're a startup, you exist and you're struggling because of COVID, for example, you lost all of your customers, they can fund you to survive. Um, then there's a lot of um, then of course a lot of has moved to virtual. So for example, all of our accelerator programs like Start and Accelerator are virtual, and it has actually helped us to get more broader range of mentors and one-on-one coaches. So before, we've always taken the mentors who are going to like help your startup and pack them into Startup Sauna. But now that we're virtual, we've had international coaches. So we've been able to take people who aren't in Finland, and they can still help your startup out. Like, we had investors from the United States talk to our startups. How can they take their startup to the United States? And we've never had this before because we usually have people who are from Finland. Um, so I think it depends a lot on what you're doing and sort of what your stage is. But the sort of money exists in one form or another. The support, like with accelerators or like workshops or creating a business model or validating your problem, also exists. Um, but of course, then you have to think with your idea that if your idea doesn't work in a COVID world, does it work in a post COVID world? So that if your idea is about travel, for example, I have some serious concerns personally whether travel will ever get back to the same level. So you might want to rethink what is the world going to look like and have hypothesis for if it's going to look like this or if it's going to look like that. What does it mean for me? Um, so yeah.
Yes. Mm. And yes, one question about Kiuas Inside. Can I
Yeah.
join Kiuas Inside? Why not in Finland?
So that is a really good question, actually. And Kiuas Insight has traditionally been for people who are in Finland. Um, However, when there's like when you register, it asks that, okay, so you affirm that you're in Finland. To be honest, if you register now and you're not in Finland, like go for it. Like we're in the process of making it more international anyway. So if you want to be among the first people who are not from Finland but want to join the platform, uh, feel free to do so, and we're gonna like make the changes pretty soon. But the idea is that we're gonna like expand it a little bit. We're still figuring out the exact format of it though. But yeah, currently there's mainly Finnish people. Like everyone else there is Finnish, so it's gonna change in the future.
Mm. And yeah, and I think I saw a lot of question about fundraising, and
Mm.
we have a fundraising workshop tomorrow. So please be at that workshop, and the speaker can answer you more that question. And yeah, hmm. So yeah, another question about the Finnish ecosystem. How is the Finnish startup ecosystem different from like the other Nordic country?
Yeah, a really good question. So Sweden has a really good startup ecosystem as well, and they have a lot more capital than in Finland. I don't know the exact public side how it works there, but according to my understanding, they don't have exactly the same players as Business Finland. I think there exists a lot of synergies, um, but I think when it terms like at least in rankings of local connectivity, Finland ranks higher. So that means that getting access to people who are like in the Finnish startup ecosystem is a lot easier than in Sweden. And then also, I think if you look at the amount of capital sort of per amount of people in the country, I think there Finland might be above Sweden as well. But in otherwise, there's like in Norway, the startup scene is pretty small. Like we haven't heard almost anything from there, and they haven't had any unicorns. Denmark has kind of their own thing. I'm not actually sure what they do, but they have some pretty good startups like Unity and Zendesk. So they definitely have some like success stories as well. But I think when it comes to Nordics, it's like impossible to argue that one is definitely better than the other. I think it also relates a little bit to the industry. But if like pure capital is the thing you might be after, I would like go to Sweden than probably if it's like flipping a coin where we're going to Finland or Sweden. Finland has been handling coronavirus better than Sweden, so that might be relevant. But otherwise, yeah, Sweden has had really great success stories, but like Spotify or Klarna and like which are like super massive companies. But then Finland, for example, in gaming, Finland is like light years ahead with like Supercell, Rovio, Small Giant Games, and like a bunch more. So I think it depends maybe on industry. I think that would be like the main criteria. Like select your industry and see which ecosystem has more success stories in that industry. But I think the sort of public side support probably is around similar.
Yes. And the last question, does Finnish ecosystem offer any support to foreign startups who want to invest or expand their business to Finland?
Yes, absolutely. In that case, send a message to Business Finland, like very clearly. If you have like if you want to expand to the Finnish market, Business Finland. We actually had a call with Business Finland yesterday or the day before, and we spoke with the people who are like in charge of this, and they're like yes, please send a message.
Yes. Yeah, I can see there's still quite many questions here. But then we are running out of time. So if the people want to ask you a question directly, how can they do?
Yeah, just send me a message on LinkedIn or email. Everything works. And yeah, I'll be happy to answer. We're currently the next week going through the applications to Kiuas Start. So if I don't answer immediately, don't worry. I answer everything. But yeah, happy to be here, and it was super fun and extremely good questions. So thank you for that. And yeah, good luck with the next presentation.
Yes. So really thank you, Patrick, for this presentation. I think like this is one of the most comprehensive speech about the Finnish startup ecosystem. And yeah, our next section will be about the Vietnam startup ecosystem, and that will be in another Zoom link. So yeah, now I will close this room, and really happy to have all the participants and also Patrick here with us. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
awesome. See you.
See you.